What about the impact, Peter, of India on this? It has a population that has swelled to 1.4 billion. They are talented people. They make incredibly good engineers and technologists. And India has the largest diaspora of any country. And many of them come here, hundreds of thousands of Indians playing a crucial. I think 3 of our largest tech companies have Indians as president or chairman. This is an enormous resource, and there's no attempt to stay at home. The Indians have not fought the brain drain that I'm aware of. This is a resource which can compensate for a lot. It will somewhat change the dynamics of America, but so will any closer relationship with the population dynamics will change, but so will any closer relationship with Mexico. So I wonder how you feel about that.
Well, let's start with the good news. India is going to be fine. In a post-China world, they're going to have to do the same thing that we're going to have to do. They're going to have to increase their industrial plant to build their own stuff. They have the capacity to do that. You could argue that their labor force is more differentiated. They can be good at multiple things at the same time, whereas we usually just do the design and the high end. And so they can probably do it with a lot less stress. But they have no partners. They don't border a country that they like or that likes them. And then they're ringed by a series of mountains and deserts and jungles. So they can't really integrate with anyone. India is India. It's an Indian story. It's not a regional story. It's not a global story. That doesn't make it bad. It just makes them alone. The question then, of course, is whether or not the flow will continue. It doesn't take a lot of international connections to get a steady trickle of skilled Indians going to the rest of the world. And if I'm right about the general global breakdown that's in front of us, they're going to be the top 0.1% of Indians, which is still 1.5 million people, that are going to try to find greener pastures somewhere else with a higher standard of living. The question is, will New Delhi ever do anything to stop that? Doesn't seem to be part of the program at the moment.
The history of America is huge adaptation to crisis. We solved the gas crisis with fracking or advanced fracking. We solved the natural rubber crisis with artificial rubber. We've done this in the Second World War. We built ships at an incredible rate, aircraft as well. I mean, we're very good at responding to crisis. And often it seems as though we need crisis in order to get something done.
It's definitely motivating.
What are the chances of the crises that you laid out stimulating something else? A greater automation, i.e. artificial intelligence at work, which it is in a lot of things people don't realize. It didn't arrive this year. It just made itself heard this year. We're an innovative people, and so are the Brits for that matter. Look at what they created in the Second World War. Incredible things to help win the war, technological things, from tanks with hammers in the front beating the ground to get rid of the landmines. Where does innovation fit into, and how does it undermine your argument?
I think we are going to have exactly that sort of burst of innovation, but a few things to keep in mind. Number one, birth rates in the advanced world, including the US, have been dropping for decades. We have fewer people to do it with. For the last 30 years, we've become used to capital being abundant and cheap because the baby boomers were in their advanced adulthood, but they hadn't retired yet. They were the richest they'd ever been. Half of them are now retired, so capital costs are higher. The Chinese have expanded their industrial plant to make all the stuff we need. We're going to have to rebuild that, competing for the access to the capital and the labor. And then finally, even if everything that you say goes down, and I think it will, you don't do it in a day. Just building the industrial plant is a 5-year process, minimum. And developing the new technologies to allow us to do these things better and with less money and less labor first requires some of that labor and some of that money. So we're trying to do, to be perfectly blunt, too many things at the same time. We'll get there, but it's not going to be as fast as it needs to be to avoid the disruptions.
But part of the magic of America is we do a lot of things at the same time. One of the things I find perpetually stimulating about the US is that there's so much going on. I remember when I arrived in this country, I wrote to a friend in England, and said, this is a fabulous place. You can do well here if you just do one thing well, like making beads. And that's still true. The other advantage we have over many countries, not all of them, but many, is that we have mobility of labor, which may be slowed down by the healthcare system as people cling to jobs because of benefits, but enormous. People are leaving California now for Texas. Mobility of labor. In Britain, when I lived in Britain, you can get people moved from Liverpool to Manchester. It's next door. So that's one of our great advantages. The immigrant population, but you need to keep refreshing it to keep this dynamic going, which is that immigrants have no legacy. They're not bound down by social norms. They're not held back by what will people think, etc. And that's been a very powerful part. And there's been different immigrants over time. In the 19th century, there were various parts of Europe. 20th century, we've seen people from elsewhere in the world, including India, which I think is a very important dynamic, and Mexico. Can't we do all these things? We have such resources that we can offer the world. And if we're short of labor, print 1 million, 10 million, 20 million green cards and go anywhere in the world, and people will volunteer to come here immediately.
We can, we will. It's just going to take a few years. And in that time, the rest of the world is going to slide. As for the green cards, that's a political question. And we go through phases in the United States where we're open and in phases when we're closed. We're clearly in a closed one right now. And what we're doing is we're kind of waiting for organized labor to figure out where they're going to fall. One of the many impacts of the Trump administration is that Donald Trump was able to lure union voters away from the Democratic Party, which they had been part of since our last party reshuffle. And they're basically swing voters right now. And the issue that they're most passionate about is immigration, because they see it as competing for their jobs. So neither the Democrats nor the Republicans want to do anything with immigration at the moment until such time as they know where unions are going to land on the political spectrum. That's not going to happen in the next 2 years, most likely.
That's very interesting. I have to declare, and it's a matter of truth, that I was president of the Washington-Baltimore Newspaper Guild and had some strikes around Washington, including the Baltimore Sun and the Associated Press. But the thing that bothers me about unions, and really does bother me, is that they're stuck, at least in the 1930s and maybe further back, that they have this bosses and workers thing, nothing like the German sense that we're all in this together. Mm-hmm. The country, it seems to me, workers are crying out for some kind of representation, but not the old industrial revolution representation with strikes and strong arm and indifference to the economic reality. Which
it's very American.
Very American, but it doesn't work anymore. A more flexible, but I've tried to talk to the unions about this, and it's not been rewarding. So much so that I think we have to let these unions die and let new ones come up.
Well, that's probably not going to happen, because in the last 20 years, you've absolutely been right. We've seen union membership declining because the economic model had moved on. But if we're going to build out a massive industrial plant, those are almost entirely blue-collar jobs. So we need more blue-collar workers than we have right now, and that gives the unions the opportunity of a lifetime in terms of establishing a higher degree of political power. They're not going anywhere.